I started this podcast because I'm fascinated by how we get better at bridge, how we reach that next level. I'm talking with expert players about how they got where they are and what they do to continue honing their skills, to less experienced players about what they're doing to improve their game, and to experts in fields outside of bridge, like learning and expertise. If you're looking to level up your game, check out my classes on Learn Bridge Online. Mondays are about the expert thought process, and Thursdays are about declare or play. You can attend the classes live or you can watch the recorded replay. I'm looking forward to leveling up together. I'm joined this week by Hall of Famer Chip Martel. Chip, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Let me start with, how did you learn bridge?
My parents taught my sister and me when we were quite young and played a little bit as a family, but that was not very serious and didn't continue for very long after we learned to play. But then when I was a sophomore in high school, I happened to see 5 Weeks to Winning Bridge by Alfred Scheinwald on my parents' bookshelf, and I picked that up and devoured it in about 3 days, and I was hooked. And after that, I taught some of my high school friends to play, and we would play a moderate amount in the student lounge. And I was also lucky enough to be in Urbana, Illinois, which is where the University of Illinois is. My high school actually was more or less on the campus. And so after we got a little farther along, I was able to join in the campus games, which meant playing with people who were older, but not mostly like 30, 40 years older. Started doing that just after Kit left the University of Illinois as a graduate student, Kit Woolsey. So there were a bunch of his proteges to help be mentors.
Wonderful.
So that got me off to a pretty good start.
Were there other books as a young player that were foundational for you?
I mean, I certainly read every bridge book I could find. The ones I remember were fairly early on Clyde Love's Bridge Squeezes Complete, and then later the Kelsey books. Later than that, certainly Bridge in the Menagerie and How You Lose at Bridge. Those were fun. I actually got one of the best bargains in that a chess place was closing out its bridge library. So I was able to get those 2 books, and I think Reese's Master Play, all 3 for $1. So that was one of the better bargains. Yeah.
That's a good deal. And then how did you get good at bridge?
Well, playing a lot, having for quite a while better players to play with and to ask questions about it. Really liking reading bridge books. There wasn't the wealth of material that's available online today, but there was the Bridge World and Bridge Bulletins. Certainly a certain amount of innate talent.
Was there a moment you realized I might be good at this? I might have some potential here?
Well, the first duplicate game I played in was a novice game, and my partner and I won that pretty easily. And then we kind of nervously advanced to the open game, which at that time, the campus game, at least the beginning of the semester, had about 20 tables in play. We finished second in that.
In your second duplicate?
Yeah. So, I had been playing for a fair while, non-duplicate bridge. I will say that the waiting to play in the next week's game was one of the longer waits of my life.
I imagine, yeah. Weekly duplicate. We need more than that.
Yeah.
All right. And then what about the transition from being a good player to playing in the nationals and in the international stage and like feeling like, hey, I'm one of the best in the world?
Well, that, for me took a while. I had, pretty good success relatively early on, like in 1974, I played in the Nationals when it was held in New York. And at that time, the Life Master pairs had 3 cuts instead of 2, one after the 3rd session and one after the 4th session. and they cut to a one-session finals. So we got to the finals of that, which was a very strong field, and finished, I think, around 10th in that.
Was that the first time you felt like, yeah, I can play with the big boys?
Well, we'd already, like won our district grand national teams. But yeah, that was the first thing. And then the next year, playing in the spin gold, we beat the 1 seed to get to the round of 16. So, I had some success fairly early on. But then, when I started playing with Lew Stansby in 1977, that was the first time playing really with a really strong established player.
How did that come about? How did you and Lou meet?
Well, we were both in the Bay Area. I had come out to Berkeley for graduate school, and in part choosing it because it had a good bridge community. So, as well, Berkeley had some other good features as well. There were various people, but actually, Rich Friesner, whom you might not know, though he's a first-class player who was a graduate student also at Berkeley back then, and he and I had played some, but he was going to start playing with somebody else, and he fixed me up with Lou, and we won the first sectional event we played in, and that was a start of a very long, successful run.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
When you played with him at the beginning, were you like, yeah, this is a guy I could see playing with long term?
I mean, I don't know at that time if I was thinking about that so much. I was more just let's work on our partnership and see how that goes. I should comment that in that spin gold where I said we beat the number 1 seed, that helped in some ways clear the way for Lou's team to win the spin gold that year.
So he owed you.
Well, I don't know about exactly that, but here was somebody who'd already won the Vanderbilt, the spin gold, and the Reisinger when we started playing.
What was that dynamic like? That, was he part partner, part mentor?
He was certainly a mentor, but I would say we were closer to equal than student and a teacher.
Yeah, he just had a little more experience.
Yeah, but I certainly learned things from him. He had, in particular, a lot more experience playing against top players. So, the style that can be successful playing against not so good players isn't always the winning style against the best players. So I certainly learned a certain amount of that from him.
What were some of the things that made that partnership so successful, do you think?
Well, we were both willing to work at it. We also had similar goals. At that time, professional wasn't as big a thing as it is now, but it was coming in, and Lou and I were both happy to play on the best non-professional team that we could find at the beginning. Later on, it got to a point where almost all the top pairs were playing on professional teams. So it really wasn't possible to play on the best team without playing on a professional team.
What was that transition like for you?
It was a little bit of a shift, particularly since the first pro team we really played on seriously was Jimmy Kane's team with Hammond and Wolf.
Pretty good team.
Yeah, it was a good team, but it was sort of a different dynamic.
Very, I would think.
Yeah.
Did you like it? Was it worth getting paid?
Well, it was nice to get paid, but I would say overall we had a better time on our non-professional teams. Though I will say some of the later clients we had, particularly Simone Deutsch and Rose Meltzer and Jeff Wolfson, and also Aubrey, were all much nicer people to play for.
But you had a real job your whole bridge career, right? You were a
Yeah,
professor?
until about 10 years ago, I was
How did you balance those two aspects of your life?
well, to some extent, it was by being, I mean, I was serious at my career. I was pretty successful as a professor. I kind of figured I was going to be good as a professor and have a successful research career and be a good teacher, but I wasn't going to be a star. I was going to devote enough energy to bridge that wasn't really going to happen.
Did you make that conscious choice that, like, I'm not going to try to be a superstar academic? I'm going to prioritize bridge?
Well, is maybe prioritize bridge enough that I wasn't going to sort of really be the academic career as my sole focus. I wasn't going to be a world-class academic and a world-class bridge player. There's just not really enough time and energy to do both of those things.
Was there ever consideration of, I'll just be good at bridge and I'll be a world class academic?
No, not really. I mean, in part because it was clear had much better prospects at being at the very top at bridge than at the very top academically.
Well, what did work for bridge look like when you and Lou were playing and you had a full time teaching job? Like between nationals, what did your life look
So mostly I didn't play very much other than in the major events, an occasional local tournament. And Lou and I, between tournaments, would go over hands from the previous ones.
like? Was this by phone?
Yeah, by phone. We lived about an hour and a half apart by car. And not too far into it, the internet came along, so we could do stuff also by email.
How did that change bridge for you, having the internet and eventually VBO?
BBO didn't really change things that much since we mostly didn't play online. We found it was more useful to talk about things than to actually play. In particular, the way in which I think it's good to practice bidding hands is by dealing out a full 52 card deal and then having one player bid like the north and east hands and the other the south and west. Use a computer to deal out the hand. And then somebody gets a PDF file with the north and east hands, and the other one gets the PDF with the south and west, and then eventually a PDF of the full deal to discuss afterwards. And by doing that, you really get practice with constructive bidding, but also competitive bidding and defensive bidding. And then at the end of the hand, you can look at the whole deal and ask, well, what would I lead? How should we card? How would the defense go?
Is this an exercise you and Marty do now?
Yes, Marty and I do that also.
Do you just do random hands generated by
Mostly
the
we do
computer?
random hands. Sometimes, if we have adopted something new, we'll try and do hands focused on that. We might be a little more likely to these days to use cubids if we were doing that.
Okay, so you do use some modern tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marty was telling me you don't really like playing online.
No, I think it kind of fosters bad habits.
How so?
Well, you're not actually seeing the cards, so it's a different experience.
For sure.
And I think it's usually less serious. There are more distractions.
Yeah.
And to me, it's mostly fairly time inefficient. And the thing I was just talking about, you get to have a 52 card deal. You can bid the hands asynchronously,
Yeah.
where one person bids them when they have a free moment, and then the other person can do the next round. And I think also in some ways, when you're doing practice type things, there's less emotional involvement. So I think it's easier for the partnership to discuss what should be done than if it's after actually having played a hand.
Interesting.
Maybe for some people that's not important, but I think it helps. I will say, though, that for me, I'm at a point where I don't think practice, as far as just playing bridge, is that useful to me. I mean, for many years went between major tournaments, often having played no hands of bridge from one
Wow.
tournament to the next. And I've talked about bridge a lot and thought about bridge a lot, but I won't actually have played kind of
Did you feel
bridge.
any rust at the beginning of a tournament after a long layoff like that?
I wouldn't say too much. No, I think usually I've been thinking about bridge, so the kind of mental gears aren't rusty.
Right. And so these days, is that kind of your routine? You don't play much between the big events?
That's right.
But you and Marty are doing plenty of work,
Right.
partnership work.
We're going over hands, we're bidding hands, so that sort of thing, which at least for me, and reading the notes, of course, is much more useful.
Yeah. You kind of feel like you've seen everything you need to see at this point, and like your bridge
No,
knowledge is kind of maxed out.
no, definitely not.
Okay.
Just saw a hand from recent trials where, admittedly, this was a double dummy thing, but the position was in a side suit. You had ace and one ups at king 10 fourth, and what you had to do was to win the ace, pitch the small one, and then rough once. So you were left with king 10 doubleton now, and that created a major tennis to threaten a throw in against the hand that was over you that had jack fifth. And I just don't remember seeing that position where you had to create this tennis position by doing that.
That's very cool.
So that's just one simple example. But there are other things, certainly, in terms of figuring out things of, oh, a player did this, so they probably have this holding. If they had something else, they wouldn't have done that. I would say there are still things very much in those categories that I see.
And do you like to go back and study ViewGraph?
Marty and I almost always try and go over all the hands we've played on ViewGraph, and sometimes we look at some of the other hands as well. The one thing I haven't been as diligent as probably would be useful is doing sort of scouting of how all the other top pairs are playing. I mean, I watch a certain amount, so I see it, but I wouldn't say I've gone to the trouble of like categorizing for each pair or player.
What does your at the tournament routine look like?
So I listened to your interview with Samantha Punch recently, and I would say I'm more like her, at least at a world championships, in that at least for like the trials or the Vanderbilt or the Spin Gold, then I really try and focus on the bridge while that's being played. So I don't mostly go out to dinner after the session. I don't really want to go over the hands much at the end of the day. I really want to be able to wind down and not be thinking about the hands as I'm trying to go to sleep. So, and I exercise every day. Used to be the gym more, but since COVID, it's been more just walking.
How much do you think that matters, exercise at a bridge tournament?
I mean, for me, I think it helps me sleep and feel better. So I think those help. I won't say it's necessarily the same for everyone.
For sure. And then between sessions, do you eat, rest?
Some of both. Usually I try and go out and grocery shop and have food in the room so I can get something quick and also eat it whatever timing works.
Are there other things that you do to just try to maximize your potential and get to the table playing your best every day?
Well, occasionally I need to take sleeping pills. To getting a good night's sleep is important.
Yeah.
Maybe some people who can play about as well when they're really tired, but that's not me.
Yeah. No, nor me. Nor me. You've mentored a lot of people, juniors and up and coming players over the years. Can you tell when someone is going to be good? And like, what is it that you see?
I'd say it's probably a few things. One is, I think, interest at working at it. Another is how well they can handle the harder hands and also understand when you're trying to explain things. But then those are all things which you can be really good at away from the table. Then there's the at the table thing of keeping your focus and not taking your eye off the ball.
When I mentor people, the thing that stands out to me is the ones who argue with me are never going to be good at bridge. If they dig their heels in and they're like, no, I'm not listening to you,
Yeah.
they have too much ego to ever be good at bridge. Does that resonate with you?
Well, I would say something related to that. If they're not willing to learn by listening to other people's arguments, I guess I would say that sometimes arguing is good and maybe they have good points, but to not really listen, that's what's. And I'm also surprised. I know there's a number of young players who, at least when I've heard from them, that they aren't really much interested in reading about bridge.
Yeah, it always shocks me. You know, Brad Moss was on the podcast recently and told me he's never read a bridge book.
Yeah.
Steve Weinstein has never read a bridge book. I don't get it. Like, there's so many positions that I've only seen in books, I've never seen in real life. And will I remember them if I encounter them in person? I mean, I have a chance at least because I read
Right.
them in the book,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Do you still read bridge books?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Any favorites you would recommend?
I mean, I like the match books a lot.
Yeah.
And, I also find it interesting to read the various biographies that have come out
Sure.
lately. I'm actually just now even reading through a book by Eddie Cantor, Advanced Bridge Defense.
Okay. The classic. Yeah. Do you feel like you get something every time you read these books?
Yeah, I think I do. Partly I said I don't play much, so keeping the gears in motion, but also, sometimes you see positions that maybe you've seen them before, but they aren't that well wedded into your data bank of things. But I'd say it's more just for keeping in practice, thinking about things.
How much time in a day do you spend reading, thinking, working on bridge?
Depends somewhat on when. So like between the trials and the summer nationals, there's a fairly long break. So that's almost 2 months. So in there are many days when I'm not spending much time, maybe half an hour or less, though there are other days when I'm spending 1 to 2 hours, I would say. Not often more than 2 hours between times until the period near the tournament where I'll be reading the notes and usually we'll be bidding some hands, getting ready.
Do you do other things like getting ready for the tournament? Do you read more bridge books or anything like that?
Not so much. I mean, I kind of do that regularly. I would say the other thing is that, like, during the trials, when I wasn't playing, I was spending probably 3, 4 hours a day watching.
Are there traits that set some of the better players apart, do you think?
Well, I mean, as we said, obviously focus. I think some willingness to really work at bridge in general and a partnership in particular. And it certainly helps if you can be a good partner.
What does that mean to you, being a good partner?
Well, trying to help your partner get the best out of his or her game by not being critical, certainly at the table. And I would say mostly not till after the tournament, unless there's something about system that really should be settled. And there's also trying to make life easier for your partner. That's, I think, one of the harder things to do on defense is to think about what problems your partner might have and what you can do to avoid them doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, that's something that playing with students has actually helped me a lot with.
Yeah, I'm sure that is.
Are there things that you think hold good players back from becoming great?
Yeah, I'm sure there's in some sense the flip side of what we said were positive things.
Right.
Like, I think people who have had a hard time keeping partnerships intact and also ones who aren't willing to put in the work to really know their system and have the agreements written down so that it's possible. So
How long have you and Marty been playing together?
we've been playing seriously for just about 13 years.
How did that partnership come about?
Well, we had been good friends for a long time and had played occasionally when my partnership with Lew was coming to an end. And I actually originally then played with Zia for a year or two. And at the same time, it became clear that that wasn't going to be a good partnership. Marty was kind of looking for a new partner also. We had been playing on teams together at that time, but Marty had been playing with Michael Camel. And as I said, it was convenient that we were both sort of looking for a new partner at the same time. So we tried to get together and be a serious partnership. Before that, we had been playing more like we fill out a card and we played without any serious system. That's another thing. It's really good I talked earlier about having a partner with similar goals. The other thing is to have a partner who wants a similar level of system complexity and is willing to work at that so that you both know it pretty well.
Whose idea was it to play transfers over a club?
I think we were each interested in doing it.
Because you and Lou played a pretty standard system, as I recall. Is that right?
We did for a long time. We did try playing transfers, but interestingly, they didn't work as well playing weak no trumps.
You had played the weak no trump for a long time. Did you want to keep playing? Did you want to switch back to a strong no trump?
I was happy to switch to playing a strong no trump. Around the time when I started playing in the middle 70s, a lot of the theorists who had been developing good system things were weak no trumpers. So there were a bunch of things for that. But later, I would say a lot of more of the theory development was for strong no trump systems. So as an example, support doubles don't work so well in a weak no trump system because you need a way to show a good balanced hand. I think also with the increase of competitive bidding, people being more aggressive, it created more problems when you opened a strong no trump with a minor.
So you've come around to strong no trumps are better?
I think so. I would say the auctions developed pretty well playing a club on balanced hands and transfer responses. And so getting to open a club more often, which you do playing strong no trumps, is a good thing.
What are some of the big edges and benefits that you found playing transfer responses?
So one of the things is that it's easy to distinguish between balanced and unbalanced hands without like missing your fit. So after, say, a club pass, a diamond showing hearts, you always, bid a heart on a balanced hand unless you have 4. And then if partner has like 4-4 in the majors with a moderate hand, they can bid a spade and you can find your spade fit. Well, if you play bid a club pass a heart, then if you rebid a no trump with a balanced hand, then you may miss your 4-4 spade fit. Also, say, particularly after a club pass a spade and standard, you'll often have hands with 3-card support where you'd like to bid 2 spades. So now here after a club a heart, you can bid 1 spade with some of those unbalanced minimums with 3-card support. And the fact that 2 spades always promises 4 makes things much easier to handle. Being able to bid a club pass, a red suit as a transfer, and rebid a no trump with better than a strong no trump gives you the chance to stop low and also to have a better auction than if you had to rebid 2 no. So there's a lot of benefits.
What are the downsides?
Well, there's sort of 2 things. One, of course, is you give the opponent some extra options to get into the auction. And I guess I would say opening a nebulous club on all balanced hands certainly creates some competitive problems when the opponent's bid, not knowing what your minor is. But I would say playing that opening 1 diamond shows an unbalanced hand to me is a bigger gain than the loss from opening a club is nebulous.
So if you had to start a new expert partnership today, how hard would you insist on playing this system?
Well, I don't know about the whole system. I think I'd be pretty inclined to play transfer responses if we were playing a basically natural system. I mean, playing a strong clubs type system is also, I think, a reasonable alternative. But I would say that if you're going to play an essentially natural system, then I think that playing the basic structure we're playing of a club on clubs or balanced hands, a diamond on balanced and transfer responses with strongish no trumps is really the right thing to do. And I think that you see that a lot of the top pairs who aren't playing a strong club have shifted to that.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I played it recently with a junior and really enjoyed it. So I think it's very sound theoretically and just practically. It works really well. How much do you think system gives top pairs an edge?
Well, I certainly think knowing what you're playing and being on a firm ground is definitely a pretty big edge.
So for someone like me who's pretty good but trying to get better, what do you think is the best use of my time at this point in that pursuit? I want to be competitive in the spin gold. What should I do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, one of the things is to try and identify where your problems are.
Yeah,
And I
they're
mean, I
ever.
can't diagnose, whether you feel like you and Greg already have a good enough partnership that mostly you're not losing imps by being outbid by the opponents. There's a lot of things you can look at now to see, certainly like Lovebridge has stuff on how your defensive and declare play is, and try and look at the hands you've played and identify what are the places where we're losing, or either I or we are losing imps, and then try and focus more on those things. And, certainly working on the partnership, I described some of what I thought were good things to do to work on your partnership and try and make sure that your system is at the right level of complexity.
Right now, in between tournaments, how well would you say you know your system if you had to sit down? 80%, 99%?
Well, I mean, part of it is, let's say, I think the right way is to weight it by frequency.
Okay.
Right.
So the normal stuff you got down.
Right.
Yeah.
But as I watch hands, I think, what would we do on this hand? And I will say, Marty and I both, when we look at hands and see things where we're not quite sure either what our bids would mean or what our judgment should be, we often exchange them and say, what do you think on this hand?
Do you have other experts at this point who you go to with questions like that?
Occasionally, yeah. We have a mailing list with about 15 or so top experts. Problems get posed to that.
Very cool. I've had some students tell me that the thing that they struggle with the most is counting and hand visualization, which I think is a pretty common thing at the intermediate and even the advanced level. Do you remember how you learned to do that?
Yeah, I think when I was first learning to play bridge, we didn't have computer type stuff to help out. So I would just deal out hands face up and sort of see how the play would develop. So I had lots of examples of literally seeing the whole hand.
Do you have any exercises to like remember spot cards or think about hand patterns or anything like that?
The only thing I would say is maybe to try and look at the beginning of the hand to try and anticipate what are going to be the important things to keep note of. So, um, probably except for maybe figuring out the opponent's distribution from their signals, if you have 3 small opposite 2 small, probably the exact spots played in that suit aren't going to be so important.
Right.
But there are other suits where it's going to be kind of critical which spot cards have come up.
Do you have routines or anything when the dummy comes down, either as declarer or as the defender, that this is the thought process you always go through?
Yeah, I would say, as declare, first thing is count my tricks. If you have a sure line to the tricks you need, then kind of that's the end of step 1, and we don't have to go much to step 2, which is to think about what the opponents have from the bidding and opening lead, then go through various lines trying to map out. Occasionally seeing, okay, this is going to be pretty complicated. This seems like pretty clearly I'm going to start this way. Let's get through those tricks and see what develops, which is partly a way of saving some mental energy. That if you may find things that are going to considerably narrow your search tree if you've seen a bit about what's going on before you commit to later. Although you also have to sort of have enough experience that what you're doing early on isn't going to get in the way of what you may want to do later. And on defense, the first thing is to try and say, what do I know about declarer's hand? And from there, then sort of try and count what are our likely defensive tricks. And then you, of course, have the additional thing of what information am I going to have to give partner? And similarly, what information can I try and get from him? And I try and do at least some of that before playing to trick 1.
Yeah. There's a lot to think about. Bridge is
Yes.
hard.
Yeah.
So one of the things everyone says is getting over a disaster. You got to put the hand behind you,
Absolutely.
Bob Hammond,
Yeah.
right? But we all know it's easier said than done. So what have you done to train yourself to do that?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing is just to be mindful that that's something to be concerned about. That just stop thinking about it and go on to the next hand. I think I'm pretty good at doing that. I would say in some ways what's maybe harder is for something that it wasn't a disaster, but there was just some interesting thing about the previous hand. And to just tell myself, no, don't think about that. That hand's over. Go on to the next one. In some ways, it's easier for me to put it past when it's a disaster, since then I sort of know that's something that I don't want to get in the way of the next hand. One thing I was going to say that I hadn't seen much come up in your previous podcast is being able to play your best game in the most important matches. So you've had the breaks, you've gotten to the finals now, or even the semifinals, if that's a major accomplishment for your team. And now can you still play your best game, even though you're maybe a little worn down since it's later in the tournament and you're playing better players? So the chances of having to deal with a bad result are higher. You're also going to be faced with more problems because playing against a strong declarer and strong defenders.
And you've got some nerves.
Right. Yeah.
In there. Yeah. So how do you do that? What's your solution?
Well, I guess I would say for me, I've kind of always been able to not feel too caught up in the nerve situation. And I guess I would say also that I've kind of always tried to play in the strongest events I could play in, so as to get as much practice as possible playing against good players. So I think that helps.
Yeah, you feel like you belong. They
Yeah.
got to beat you.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. And I will say, Marty and I have had a pretty amazing streak in that we've played in the finals of the Soloway and 2 Spin Golds and 3 Vanderbilts and the Bermuda Bowl without losing one.
What do you attribute that to?
Well,
Other
luck.
than being good and okay, lucky, but obviously you're playing at your best in the big match.
Well, or at least playing well.
Well enough. Do you feel nervous in the big matches anymore? Ever? Did you ever?
There were always some nerves, but I was pretty much always good at just focusing on each hand.
Does playing professionally change that at all when there are expectations and there's money on the line?
Well, I think one advantage maybe I have is bridge not being my main living. So since I don't really depend on that, and somebody also once mentioned, I think maybe it was Mark Jacobus, that there was some hand where we had doubled the opponents and made what was very much the percentage defense to beat it two instead of assuring down one. And he was saying that often as a bridge pro, you just don't want to bring back minus 670. So even if it wasn't sort of the best long run expectation for your career, you just took the safe down one. Since I wasn't so dependent on that, I could do what I thought was the best bridge thing.
Do you think that's been an advantage for you that you don't have, I don't know, that little bit of conservatism that someone has when a bad result and they might get fired and that's their livelihood?
I would say probably a bigger factor is that I can pick the team I play on
Yeah.
based on its prospects and how much fun I think I'll have playing on the team.
Yeah.
I think that's a more of a first order effect.
Fair enough. Did you ever have an offer to play with one of the pairs people thought were cheating and turn it down or anything like that?
Yeah, we did. Lew and I were asked to play on a team with Lanzarote and Barati and definitely said no. And I said, and you shouldn't be playing with them either.
Yeah.
I was sure they were crooks at that time.
That was before the whatever the big thing that got them caught.
Right. Well, and they only were sort of caught for signaling their partner of what an opponent had. They were actually
Right.
never really caught for collusive cheating in terms of signaling their hands, even though it was clear that they were doing that.
How clean do you think the game is today?
I think that in terms of the really bad stuff of the, having a prearranged signal, I think it's pretty good. I still think that there are a number of players who take advantage of their partner's tempo.
Right. Old black magic sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think the tablets at the trials help with that?
For sure, I would say, particularly compared with screens on defense. But even with bidding boxes, people have to be pretty careful to not have it be audible when they put their bidding cards down.
Yep. Yep. And the spacing of the bidding cards and
Yeah, but I'm saying that's intentional.
that's intent. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that there's much more not prearranged signaling than just picking up on stuff that partner does.
So if you were given a vote for should we play, round of 16 on in the big, Vanderbilt and whatever on Love Bridge, would you be yay or nay?
I'd be in favor.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some logistical things. They have to be able to get the space and have the people running the game who can manage the technology.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be the two people in a hotel room the way it is in the trials for the larger rounds. But, I mean, that is bridge at its best, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. For me,
Yeah. Well, you're not allowed to say otherwise.
Right.
There's someone in the house who might
But as you
take
may
up.
have but as you may have noticed also, I think in a lot of ways, the way it's done in the trials with two people in a room, for those who maybe aren't seeing, like North and East are together and South and West are together, it's really a more social event.
It is. Yeah,
'Cause you
Marty and
can
I
really,
had a blast.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it surprises a lot of people. You can just be so much more friendly. I know Anand had a really good time playing with you. So, yeah, I have found it just in every way to be superior. And I owe Jan an apology. I was skeptical for a long time. And she stuck to her guns, and as usual, she was right.
Well, and she did, obviously a lot of the work to make it work well.
She did. What she does for bridge is unbelievable. What's it like being married to someone like that who's just such a force of nature?
Well, for me, it's great. For all the success I've had in bridge, the best thing that I got out of bridge was being married to Jan.
Well, that's a lovely place for us to wrap up.
Okay,
So
good.
thank you so much. This has been great. It's a pleasure playing against you guys in the trials. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, you gave us quite a close run there.
It was a lot of fun.
Well, good. And thanks for doing this. I think you got a lot of interesting stuff with the podcast.
Thanks a lot.
Good to talk to you. Bye-bye.